Okay, so this evening we're going to sample the Turning Point Ecstasy of Gold. Now, Ecstasy of Gold is Turning Point's first barrel-aged beer since they moved to the Knaresborough Brewery. They brewed an Imperial Stout using cacao nibs and vanilla flavourings for quite some time. But they took the opportunity and for a number of brews, they've been aging beers in old bourbon casks. They've taken the opportunity, having moved into the Knaresborough site, to release the first barrel-aged brew. And they've taken their Ecstasy Stout, as I say, it's brewed with cacao nibs and with vanilla. And they've matured it in bourbon casks. And the other week we were at the brewery for a disco royalty tasting session, and they were describing how they got a number of bourbon casks from a variety of bourbon distilleries in the US, and they'd used those to mature this. Now, if you're into your malt whiskies, you'll know that the malt whisky industry, they traditionally mature their whiskies in either bourbon casks or in sherry casks. So if you get a whiskey like the Macallan, that's been matured fairly extensively in sherry casks. If you look at some of the Islay malt whiskies, you get a whiskey like Bowmore. They mature a proportion of Bowmore in bourbon casks. They mature a proportion of Bowmore in sherry casks. And there is actually one of the Bowmore whiskies that's been matured exclusively in sherry casks for quite some time. They call it Black Bowmore, and it's taken the sherry character from those sherry casks, and it almost looks like Coca-Cola. Incredible whiskey, but it's very rare and it's bloody expensive. If you're ever on Islay and you get the chance to try it, the Bowmore Hotel do a dram of Black Bowmore. It's eye-wateringly expensive. Well worth seeking out though. If you're ever on Islay, I suggest you go and have a look at that. But this idea of maturing beers and spirits in casks that have been previously used is something that's taking the world. And the malt whisky industry have been at the forefront of this. So if you go around distilleries in Scotland, you'll see that there are maturing whiskies in Chardonnay casks. They're maturing it in bourbon casks. They mature it in sherry casks, in port pipes, in Madeira casks. And they all bring their own little subtleties to the drinks that are maturing there. And beer's the same. You know, why shouldn't you mature beer in different spirit casks? And one of the earlier adopters of this were Innis and Gunn in Edinburgh. They're a long-standing Edinburgh brewery, and their craft brews where they'd actually got beers that have been aged in various whiskey casks. They've been on the market for quite some time. And Turning Point have certainly taken that idea forward and have carried on with doing it. And this, as I say, this is the first one that they've done in the Knaresborough site. So they moved into the Knaresborough site at the start of 2020. I believe, ironically, they moved into the brewery just as lockdown took hold. So the idea of the disco royalty box and selling beers to people at home came out of that. And certainly I had the first beer I purchased from Turning Point during the lockdown was one of their pale ales. It's the House in the Rock. And if you ever get to Knaresborough, the House in Rocks, it's a fairly iconic site in Knaresborough. It is literally a cave. It's a house built into the rocks in the cliffs in Knaresborough, and it's fairly pretty unique sort of house. So they've Turning Point have really made themselves at home in Knaresborough, and as time's passed, they've now got the tap room. They've opened that up, and as people have started to be able to go out and have a drink, then you can now go along to the tap room and try the beers. But right at the start of the lockdown, they were looking to carry the business on, and the way that they chose to do that was selling beers locally, and it was really nice. I remember sitting in my office in my bedroom at home, looking out of the window and seeing the van pull up outside, and the chap coming out with his cask of beer in his hand, coming up to the front door. I went downstairs and met him at the front door, and he said, "There's your beer." It was great, absolutely, and it was nice to actually have some decent quality beer at home. When all the pubs were shut, you could support a local brewery, you could support local businesses, and still enjoy a beer. Great way to do it, and I think my interest in doing these videos has grown out of that. You know, these breweries have set out to keep business going, and it's a new paradigm for having a beer. You don't have to go out to the pub, do you? You can sit at home with your family, you can enjoy some really good quality beers. Anyway, enough waffling. Let's get on to this particular beer. As I say, it's the Ecstasy of Gold. It's an Imperial Stout. It's been brewed with cacao nib, and it's been brewed with vanilla flavouring. So essentially, you've got a stout, you've got those lovely rounded chocolate malt flavours. The hopping in it is quite a light hop. It is there. You need to have hops to have a beer, but the sweetness of the stout comes out from the chocolate malts and the crystal malts. You get that lovely roasted flavour in a stout, and this one, it's an Imperial Stout. It's 10% ABV, so it's not to be sniffed at. They've then taken the beer once it's finished once it's finished brewing it, and they've popped it into these bourbon casks. And it's been in there for 10 months, maturing in the casks, picking up that bourbon character. And they've then taken all the bourbon casks, they've decanted the beers, and they've blended them together. So it's not just a single bourbon character that you've got. You've got the character of the different bourbon whiskies in there. So let's just go with it. As I say, this was one of the beers that the brewery were handing out to sample at the Disco Royalty Open Day that I was at recently. And if you're interested in the Disco Royalty idea, keep an eye out on Turning Point's website on the 1st of every month. They will advertise more slots in the Disco Royalty box sale. You need to be pretty quick to get in there. It's difficult to get hold of. The artwork, as I say, Turning Point are well known for artwork. I've put links into the artworks in the initial unboxing video that I did. So there we go. That's the Ecstasy of Gold Stout. So let's give it a go. So on the nose, there's definitely a cocoa flavour to it. You can pick up the chocolate in there, and there's also, I suppose, it's almost a savoury character. It's difficult to describe, but as I say, there's an umami on the nose. It's hard to describe exactly what it is. But there's the cocoa. There's very definitely the cocoa nib there. If you ever go to York, and you head out of York up towards Huntington area of York, you'll go past the Nestle factory. And similarly, if you go to Birmingham and go to the Bourbon area, the Bourneville area of Birmingham, and the Cadbury's factories there, they're processing the cocoa beans there, and as they roast and they process the cocoa beans, you get a smell, and it's not the smell of a chocolate bar. It's a different aroma to a chocolate bar. It's an almost toasted aroma. It's really hard to describe, but the aroma I'm getting from this, just on the nose, is very much like walking down the streets of Huntington in York, or around the streets of Bourneville in the West Midlands. It's that roasted chocolate flavour that you're getting from the roasting of the cocoa beans, and yeah, there's definite vanilla notes in there. So let's just sample this. So the first thing that you get, absolutely the first thing you get is chocolate. There's a very pronounced chocolate flavour on the palate. but you also get that bourbon sweetness. There's a roasted character. There's very much that toasty character that you get with the chocolate malts and the roasted malts, but you definitely get the bourbon. You really do get the bourbon cask flavour in there. Got to be careful. I'm not going to get through this in just a few sips just to sample it. It's very much not a quaffing beer. It's a sipping beer. It's one of those things that you would definitely have as a dessert beer. But yeah, there's the vanilla's very subtle. It is very subtle. It's I think coffee's one of the flavours that comes over quite strongly here. There's very definitely a coffee flavour. That's the dog. That's definitely not the beer. That's the dog. I'm sorry. Our dog's got a little bit of an upset tummy, and that's the dog. That's definitely not the beer. Okay. Right. That's better. He's going to need to go out shortly. Yeah, that is absolutely gorgeous. It's not a drink that you're going to sort of get through vast quantities of. When we were at the brewery, they were serving this in small, quite small sort of glasses. This glass I've got, I love this glass. Hands up, this glass came as part of a beer package, and it didn't come from Turning Point. It came from one of Turning Point's competitors in the Harrogate area. But I just love the glass. It just holds a can nicely. So you're getting sort of a third of a litre in one of these. So just over half a pint, round about half a pint. Yeah, so Ecstasy of Gold. It's certainly a beer to seek out. It is well worth seeking this one out. It's not a cheap beer. It's quite expensive per can. But then again, you look at the effort that's gone into this. This is a stout. They could have put the stout in cans and kicked it out quite early on. But it's spent 10 months maturing in bourbon casks. There's been that exchange of flavours between the bourbon cask and the beer. Actually, it'd be quite interesting to taste a spirit that was matured in these casks after the beer had been matured in it. That would be quite an interesting experiment. One that I'd probably like to see. So yeah, Ecstasy of Gold. If you like your stouts, if you like an Imperial Stout, and as I say, bear in mind this is 10% ABV. It's not a lightweight drink. It's a pleasant after dinner drink. It's late evening, early hours of the morning almost now. Quite enjoying it. Just sitting back. Lovely roasted flavour, lovely chocolate flavour to it. Hint of vanilla. I say the vanilla for me. My personal taste, it's not jumping out at me. I don't get this huge hit of vanilla, and to be honest, I would sort of expect vanilla anyway from an oak cask. It's one of the flavours that you will get in an oak cask, especially an oak cask that's been maturing a bourbon whiskey. It's a sweetish drink. It's very definitely an after dinner drink. I'm getting hiccups now. That's 10% ABV beers for you. It's worth seeking out. I enjoy it. I do enjoy it. Stout was never one of my favourite drinks. I did try Russian Courage Stout many years ago, back in the 70s when Courage were doing that. And that Imperial Stout style is one that I do like, but it's not one for drinking pints and pints of. A can of that's more than enough in an evening just to settle yourself down. You compare it to a glass of wine, it's a big glass of wine really, isn't it? It's good, it's nice. Seek it out, enjoy it. Turning Point Brewery, I'll put a link in the in the notes at the bottom so that you can go and find it. There are only ever going to be limited quantities of this. They're only ever going to have the amount of beers that they brewed and put into those casks. Once it's gone, it's gone. I've had a couple of cans of this up to now. I've had the drink of it at the brewery. If I can get hold of a couple more cans just to keep in my stock, I will do that. So that's that. The Ecstasy of Gold from Turning Point Brewery in Knaresborough. A really classy Imperial Stout, 10% ABV, matured in whisky casks, bourbon whisky casks, something out of the ordinary, well worth a try. Keep your eyes open for it. Enjoy. Thank you very much. See you again soon.